Akala ko ba na-seize na? Nasa inyo na? Di ba? O, nasaan yon? Nasaan yun store?
Sir, pa-update ko na lang po kayo. Wala po akong information regarding the matter.
Ako, sagot ko, ibinenta ulit. Di ba? Sinis, and then ibinenta sa mas murang halaga. Kanina ibinenta? Alam niyo naman siguro yung kung kanino. Kilala mo si Don Navosa ng Navotas.
No, sir.
Smuggler yan ng oil. Kasama na yung pag-smuggle niya ng asukal. Kilala mo si Jackie Chu.
No, sir.
Kilala mo si Aaron Uy.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Kilala mo si Lyndon Tan.
No, sir.
That was Senator Raffy Tulfo in today's Senate Energy Committee hearing, where the senator tagged alleged oil smugglers in the Philippines. We will have that story and more in the program. From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time, I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. The big story tonight.
We begin the newscast with local manufacturers of basic goods and prime commodities asking the Trade Department to allow them to raise their prices. They are citing higher production costs.
But will the DTI give in to the demand of manufacturers? Here's what we know. Trade Undersecretary Ruth Castelo said the agency originally intended to release an updated SRP bulletin this month. However, they're still studying the requests as well as validating the figures presented by local manufacturers. Castelo said that local manufacturers had cited several factors that were affecting their production costs. Now, these included the rising prices of raw materials, logistics costs, and packaging materials.
In the DTI's last updated SRP bulletin issued in August last year, the prices of 67 stock-keeping units on its list rose by 3% to 10%. These included items such as canned sardines, processed milk, coffee refill, and coffee mix, instant noodles, bottled water, canned meat, and bath soap. Castelo, meanwhile, said that the DTI will meet with DA officials to address the rising prices of red onions and eggs in the local market. Based on the DTI's market monitoring report, locally produced red onions were selling from 320 pesos and 450 pesos per kilo as of January 18. That compares to the 200 pesos per kilo a year ago. On the other hand, a medium-sized egg in Metro Manila now costs between 8 to 9 pesos. That's up from 6 pesos in 2022. Now, here to share some insights on the impending price hikes in goods and commodities, we have with us Stephen Cua, President of the Philippine Amalgamated Supermarkets Association, live via Zoom. Good evening. Welcome, Sir Cua, once again to the big story.
Evening, Robbie. Richard.
Sir, let me take it from the other's end of this question, because we've been reporting on price increases for weeks now. Are there any products, especially on the commodity side, that are actually stable in their prices?
Of course there are, okay? But for this January, already around a minimum of 25 manufacturers have informed us, notified us of their price adjustments or increases for some of their items. This would include basic necessities as well as prime commodities.
Okay, and now sinabi nilang mga producers, they're citing a lot of inputs, logistical costs, packaging as well. Are these all fair assessments and reports? And is it really inevitable for all of these prices to rise?
Well, those are the basic reasons why the prices of these goods are increasing. Remember that manufacturers don't want to increase prices unless necessary. They don't want to lose market share to competitors. There are other reasons, like, for example, cost of tin for some of the manufacturers. And others have explained to us that the raw material, the formula, the mix for the items that they're producing came in with the wrong formula. So they had to repurchase the correct formula for their for their drinks. This is soda actually, no?
Tell us a little bit about the situation in supermarkets now. How long have you held on to this request for a price hike on goods and commodities? And kasi kanina nakikinig ako sa radyo and then you were talking about parang farm gate prices being low tapos sinisisi sa traders and supermarkets. What exactly is the situation on your side?
I'm just as puzzled as you are, no, Gretchen. I think the authorities, no, not us. We're on the retail, at the retail end of the supply chain, no. I think the government should look into this. DILG should look into this, no. They should check out why farm gate prices are that low. On one end, associations which have to do with egg producers and onion growers are saying that they're selling their products at such low prices. How come it comes on to the shelves of supermarkets at such high prices? No, we're just at the receiving end of from the suppliers of these goods and just pass on a regular margin. No, so I don't have the answer to that as to where the gap went. No, so maybe DILG, DA, DTI should look at this.
In the meantime, Mr. Kua, on the consumer side, ano pong napapansin niyo sa mga supermarkets, sa mga grocery? What is changing in the behaviors or the coping mechanisms of our consumers?
Well, consumers are opting for the smaller packaging, no? They're opting for sachets, no? Just to make sure that everything fits into the grocery basket, which I'm sure not everything, is there, no? As they would want it to be, no? I think people haven't just tightened their belts. They've changed their belts, no, and to smaller sizes, and still, no, further prioritizing of what needs to be spent given the limited budget. No? I guess economists worldwide are saying that prices will continue to increase in 2023, not just for developing countries, for developed countries as well. No, they all have historic, record high inflation rates. No. Not to say that that's good for us, but we gotta come up with short-term solutions as well as I've mentioned in the past, the long-term solutions. We gotta find ways of providing raw materials and not just be at the mercy of foreign suppliers.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Kua from the Philippine Amalgamated Supermarkets Association. Meanwhile, Senator Raffy Tulfo believes that the smuggled fuel seized by the Bureau of Customs were being resold. During a Senate Committee on Energy consultative meeting, Tulfo slammed BOC Special Agent Anthony Escandor after being unable to give an answer where the remaining seized fuel went. In their report, the BOC had only seized a total of 2.1 million liters of fuel so far. The senator also listed supposedly known oil smugglers and questioned Escandor when he said he did not recognize any of the names mentioned.
Akala ko pa na-seize na. Nasa inyo na. Di ba? O, nasaan yun? Nasaan yun store?
Sir, pa-update ko na lang po kayo. Wala po akong information regarding the matter.
Ako, sagot ko, ibinenta ulit. Diba? Sinis, and then ibinenta sa mas murang halaga. Kanina ibinenta? Alam niyo naman siguro yung kung kanino. Kaya wag na tayo maglokohan dito. Kaya for me, tigilan natin to, itong sa SGS na to. Itong mga fuel marking na ito na, diba? Nagsasign tayo ng pera.
After the break, President Bongbong Marcos made some big pronouncements regarding the country's foreign policy during the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. We'll be discussing that with De La Salle University International Studies Professor Renato De Castro when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News. watching The Big Story here on One News.
The Philippine delegation over in Davos, Switzerland is now at the tail end of its participation at the World Economic Forum. On the third day of the forum, President Bongbong Marcos met with WEF President Borge Brendy, where he revealed how his foreign policy will be like for the rest of his term. Marcos says that he should not be made to take sides amid intense geopolitical rivalry, a principle which he says also applies to all of his foreign policies.
So when asked which side are you on, I said, well, I don't work for Beijing. I don't work for Washington, D.C. I work for the Philippines. So I'm on the side of the Philippines. And that really translates into a very simple statement of foreign policy, which is I promote the national interest.
Marcos is also currently facing pressure to support Ukraine's peace plan that calls for the full withdrawal of Russian troops and that would condemn Russia's takeover of the country or invasion of the country. While Marcos is open to talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he previously said the peace plan is a matter that should be discussed only by Russia and Ukraine. Marcos also told Brendy that maritime tensions in the South China Sea keeps him up day and night. But the president said he is not considering any military solutions to address the issue, nor will he be taking sides on ongoing tensions between the United States and China.
It's constantly in flux. So you have to pay attention to it and to make sure that you are at least aware of the present situation so that you are able to respond. If something goes wrong here, we are going to suffer. When asked what is your foreign policy and how would you describe it, I say it's a commitment to peace and hewing very, very close and guided very, very closely by our national interest.
Marcos also met with the chief of the International Monetary Fund, who praised the Philippines for being, quote, an exceptionally well-performing country despite economic challenges. Marcos and IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva discussed issues affecting the world economy as well as the challenges that the Philippines is facing, like food supply problems. At a separate panel discussion, the president, who also heads the Agriculture Department, said food security remains at the top of his administration's economic agenda.
Anchored on our vision for a prosperous, resilient, and secure Philippines by the year 2040, are the overreaching goals of this administration that are to build an inclusive society when no one is hungry, where Filipinos live long and healthy lives, and where they are provided with an environment built upon trust and security.
Here to share with us his thoughts on Marcos's foreign policy bared at the WEF, we have on the show international affairs analyst Renato De Castro, and he is joining us live via Zoom. Welcome to The Big Story, Professor.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Your thoughts on President Marcos's independent stance. He says he will not be taking sides regarding the rivalry between the U.S. and the Philippines, as well as the Ukraine-Russia war. And then he also says that there's no point in building up our armory. Your thoughts on that?
Okay, number one, when he said he doesn't want to take any side, well, of course, that's easier said than done. You know, that's the ideal situation. This is basically the catchword in ASEAN. We want to be out of this great power competition. Again, the point is, yeah, you can say it, but you have, you know, although in it's an interview, he mentioned pressures. He talks about the fact that there are existing pressures that could force countries to take side. Now, specifically, of course, in the Philippines, we don't want to take side. But for one thing, of course, based on the survey conducted by the Pulse Asia, Filipino people had already considered which side they're on. Right? I don't know, you know, the survey. Filipinos basically trust countries like Japan, the United States, and Australia, and of course, they don't trust China. So the government might say, I don't want to take side, but you have the Filipino people, based on that survey, basically indicated that they can identify with themselves with certain countries. Also, of course, in terms of, you know, our agreements we have. we cannot really say we cannot take side if we have a formal treaty alliance. And this is something that he and Vice President Kamala Harris discussed last November about the Mutual Defense Treaty. So how can you be, you cannot take side if you have a treaty when one of those great powers? And of course, the other challenge is given the fact that we have a territorial dispute with China, then every now and then you have tensions coming out. And you cannot simply say that I cannot take side confronted by a country that's trying to basically take control of 85% of your exclusive economic zone. Again, this is the aspirational aspect of foreign policy, which is not really bad. Under this condition, this is a situation, this is the ideal situation that I would like to achieve.
Yes, but to that point, Professor De Castro, he offered two framings in very important context here. One, he said this rivalry between the United States and China. Didn't necessarily phrase it that way, but that was the framing, that we would not get involved in this
as
rivalry.
much as possible, yeah.
On the other hand, he said, of course, the only thing in my mind is our national interest, our national security. How fair is it for him to basically make U.S. and China as the main framing of his dilemma in this arena, where national security precisely is front and center as well? It's as if the West Philippine Sea is simply an arena. We just happen to be here, and actually awayan ng China and the United States. It's not a very straightforward acknowledging of the other side of the reality here.
Yeah, the reality is, of course, is geography. We are straddling beside the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. It's practically our backyard. You know, in Southeast Asia, is primarily an arena between these two great powers. China wants, Southeast Asia to be its backyard. U.S. goal, of course, is to maintain a balance of power in the region. And whether they like it or not, the ASEAN member states are, again, no different from what happened during the Cold War, caught in the middle of great power competition. The idea, the way that ASEAN would play it is we try to develop what we call this geostrategic space, wherein we could say, we could enjoy a degree of autonomy. Again, it will depend on how the great powers would play the game. A low-level great power competition would provide us that opportunity to be aloof, to enjoy that strategic diplomatic space. But once, of course, you have a shooting war, that's the end of that diplomatic space. Whether we like it or not, we will be caught in the middle.
So do you agree with the president on what he said, that there's no point in building up our armory? Do you think that we have enough to have a strong footing on the negotiating table?
You have to understand, I watched the context of the question. The context of the question, just like Japan, that have increased its 2% GNP. He is saying, I don't want to compare the Philippines with Japan. Of course, we're talking about Japan increasing its defense spending by 2% of its gross domestic product. You're talking about the third largest economy in the world. And of course, Japanese arms buildup, even the Japanese admitted it, is based, of course, on developing certain preemptive and, strategic strikes. That Japan is not any more defensive, they could also take the initiative. President Marcos is saying, no, we will not adopt it. And he was very frank about it. We are not in the same economic situation like Japan. But it doesn't mean that he will not build up the credible defense capability of the armed forces of the Philippines, which he announced last December. So we have to understand the context of that question.
All right, thank you. That was International Affairs Analyst Renato De Castro. The Office of the Civil Defense reports at least 33 people have died due to floods and landslides this month. The agency says at least 1.6 million Filipinos were affected by combined effects of the low-pressure area, shear line, and the northeast monsoon since January 2. 7 individuals, meanwhile, remain missing. Damage to agriculture is pegged at more than 400 million pesos. As of 4 p.m. today, Pag-asa says the shear line continues to affect the eastern sections of southern Luzon and Visayas. The shear line is the weather system formed when cold and warm winds meet. The northeast monsoon, meanwhile, continues to affect the rest of Luzon.
After the break, a Senate committee recommends the filing of graft and perjury charges against high-ranking officials of the Education Department and the Budget Department's Procurement Service. That's for their alleged anomalous purchase of overpriced and outdated laptops. More details on that when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
You're still watching the big story here on One News.
The Senate Blue Ribbon Committee wants charges filed against former senior officials of the Education Department and the procurement arm of the Department of Budget. This is in connection with the overpriced procurement of laptops for public school teachers. After 5 rounds of hearing, the panel found the procurement to be overpriced by at least 979 million pesos. The committee recommended that complaints be filed against former DepEd USEC Alain Del Pascua and former PSDBM head Lloyd Christopher Lau. The panel also recommended the abolition of the PSDBM and for the Commission on Audit to conduct a special fraud audit.
Request an AMLC, Anti-Money Laundering Council investigation on the overpriced procurement, including an inquiry into bank deposits of the public officials identified in this investigation.
Taking a look back at this issue, it was the Commission on Audit that flagged the overpriced purchase. In its 2021 audit report, COA pointed out the procurement of 2.4 billion pesos worth of entry-level laptops for public school teachers. The COA said the DepEd should explain why it agreed to buy laptops for more than 58,000 pesos, which was way above their estimated purchase price of 35,000 pesos. This resulted in fewer units being bought for teachers. Aside from this, there's also the issue on specs. The purchased laptops had Intel Celeron processors commonly used in budget computers. In comparison, the units were more expensive than even MacBook Airs. For its part, the Department of Education says it will consider the Senate panel's recommendations. The agency is conducting its own internal investigation on the officials who signed off on the procurement order.
we are one with them dun sa layunin na talagang mas maging maganda pa ang procurement process. Tayo na rin po ay nagkaroon ng admin proceedings dito sa DepEd ukol doon sa signing authority pagdating sa pagpapalit ng specs na nangyari doon sa laptop issue na ito. At yung admin proceedings po are ongoing. Nagsasubmit na po yung mga nasasakdal ng kanilang position papers.
The proposed single ticketing system for traffic violations in Metro Manila is expected to be implemented within the first quarter of the year. Mon Gualvez with the report.
Shuttle service driver Boyet has held onto this traffic violation ticket for 4 months after disregarding a traffic sign on Marcos Highway in Antipolo. He has to go to MMDA to pay the fine. But because of his work hours and simply the hassle, he couldn't do so.
Bali doble nawawala kasi abala, hindi ka makakapasok ng isang araw kasi kailangan mong puntahan yung kung saan ka nahuli.
These concerns pushed the Metro Manila Council and other transport agencies to create a Metro Manila traffic road and single ticketing system for the whole NCR.
It is very, very beneficial sa ating mga motorista, itong single ticketing. At hindi na rin magkakaiba yung penalty. So hindi ka namang huhula magkano ba ang penalty sa Makati, magkano sa Pateros, magkano sa Caloocan.
The technical working group earlier approved the proposed Metro Manila Traffic Code where the 20 most often committed traffic violations are indicated. Once the single ticketing system is imposed, some local government units will be forced to adjust penalties for traffic violations. MMDA will shoulder the cost for the hard drive and IT requirements of the single ticketing system. It's not affected by the temporary restraining order issued against the No Contact Apprehension Policy or NCAP, which is also under the Metro Manila Traffic Code. The MMDA plans to implement the single ticketing system during the first quarter of 2023 or the first week of April once it gets the go signal from all Metro Manila mayors. For News 5, Mon Gualvez, we are One News.
Good news for Filipinos. Filipina actress Dolly De Leon is nominated for Best Supporting Actress at the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. This is for her performance as Abigail in Triangle of Sadness. The awarding ceremony is set to take place on February 19. De Leon has already received major recognition for the role, including a historic Golden Globe nomination in the Best Supporting Actress category. She's definitely brought us a lot of pride with that role. Ang gusto ko lang sana mapanood natin dito sa Pilipinas. Ano?
I actually watched it. It was shown for a limited time in some select cinemas. I was able to watch it.
Abangan natin yan. And before we go, speaking of another pride, Parokya ni Edgar has started raising funds for their guitarist Gab Chiki, who is currently hospitalized for pneumonia. Parokya frontman Chito Miranda took to Facebook to share his bandmate's condition. He said Gab was diagnosed with lymphoma late last year and has been undergoing chemotherapy. He is currently in the ICU for pneumonia due to complications from the sickness. Chito is now appealing to fans and fellow musicians for help to bring Gab back on his feet. Now, for those who want to pitch in, you may send them to the following accounts flashed on your screens.
And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, The Philippine Star, Business World Online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more analysis. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
The big story is also available via Signal Play app. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. Ako po si Gretchen Ho. Stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.